In this video, I want to explain Spinoza's doctrine of the eternity of the mind, at least insofar as I understand it. I think the best way to set the scene is to jump right to the end of Book 5. Proposition 51 is the last proposition but one in the Ethics. And what he is doing here is contrasting his doctrine of the eternity of the mind with the general belief of the multitude concerning life after death. So let me read some of this. Most people seem to believe that they are free insofar as they may obey their lusts, and that they cede their rights insofar as they are bound to live according to the commandments of the divine law. They therefore believe that piety, religion, and generally all things attributable to firmness of the mind are burdens which, after death, they hope to lay aside and to receive the reward for their bondage, that is, for their piety and religion. It is not only by this hope, but also chiefly by the fear of being horribly punished after death, that they are induced to live according to the divine commandments, so far as their feeble and infirm spirit will carry them. So this popular belief in the fear of life after death is something that Spinoza sees as being deeply screwed up, because people are induced in this way to fear the consequences of their actions, which is to say, to fear their power of activity, the conatus. They come to be afraid of their own existence in this world for fear of being horribly punished after death. So this is what he's contending with. So we continue in the second paragraph. If men had not this hope and this fear, but believed that the mind perishes with the body, and that no hope of prolonged life remains for the wretches who are broken down with the burden of piety, they would return to their own inclinations, controlling everything in accordance with their lusts, and desiring to obey fortune rather than themselves. Such a course appears to me not less absurd than if a man, because he does not believe that he can by wholesome food sustain his body forever, should wish to cram himself with poisons and deadly fare. Or if, because he sees that the mind is not eternal or immortal, he should prefer to be out of his mind altogether and to live without the use of reason. So one thing to note here is that this is the only instance of the word immortal in the Ethics. Spinoza's doctrine of the eternity of the mind is not to be confused with traditional doctrines about immortality of the soul. And a second thing to bear in mind is that what he is aiming to do is to provide an alternative to the belief that the mind perishes with the body. And this alternative he calls the eternity of the mind. So let's look at his definition of eternity. Okay, he cites definition 8 of part 1 at this point in proposition 30 in part 5, saying eternity is the very essence of God insofar as this involves necessary existence. So working backwards to the definitions in book 1. Definition 8 defines eternity. He says, eternity, by eternity, I mean existence itself insofar as it is conceived necessarily to follow solely from the definition of that which is eternal. So eternity is a form of existence. In fact, it's necessary existence. And in his explanation, he says, existence of this kind is conceived as an eternal truth, like the essence of a thing, and therefore cannot be explained by means of continuance or time, even though continuance may be conceived without a beginning or end. So he's clearly distinguishing himself from the Aristotelian notion of eternity, okay, as everlasting duration. However, it would be a mistake to assume that what he means by this is the Platonic or Neoplatonic idea of time, idea of eternity as timelessness, which is the standard theological usage. The history of this is, as I understand it, is that Boethius took the Platonic idea of eternity as timelessness and attempted to resolve the conundrum about divine foreknowledge and free will by saying that in eternity everything happens all at once. This is the nunc stans. And this, satisfied people up until about the 17th century, when people did begin to call it out as nonsense. By the time Spinoza was writing, it had already been denounced as incomprehensible by several writers, such as Hobbes and of Newton, and I think Descartes. The history of this, there is a history by Yitzhak Melamed about how the conception of eternity evolved during the early modern period. I'll put a reference to that in the comments below for anybody who is interested. For Spinoza, eternity means necessary existence and has nothing whatsoever to do with duration or time. The definition here, definition 8, he appears to have made a sort of elementary error by using the word eternal in the definition itself. What's going on here is that Spinoza has got caught up in the mechanism of the geometric method, which requires that he can not refer to ideas other than those that have preceded the current proposition or definition that he's working with. If you go back to definition 1, he introduces the idea of the causa sui, that which is self-caused, meaning of course God, that which is self-caused, whose essence entails existence. Okay, that is the eternal thing he is referring to here. So in case you haven't actually studied book 1, substance is, or God or nature, is characterized by this property of being self-caused. It's essence entails existence. Particular things, which Spinoza calls the modes of substance, uh, are not such that their existence is entailed by their essence. They come into existence and go out of existence uh, in a way which appears to be independent from their essence. You can't deduce the existence of a given person merely from that person's essence or definition. Okay, so so he says that eternity um, is not to be understood in terms of time or duration. Let's see how he understands these terms, time and duration. There's a letter, which is often referred to as the letter on infinity, where he makes his understanding, well, as clear as ever he does on these topics. Remember that substance is God or nature. The modes of substance are particular things, which for Spinoza cannot exist or be conceived apart from God or nature. So he says, we conceive the existence of substance to be entirely different from the existence of modes. The difference between eternity and duration arises from this. For it is only of modes that we can explicate the existence by duration, but we can explicate the existence of substance by eternity. So eternity characterizes the existence of substance, the causa sui, the self-caused thing, and duration, the existence of particular things, the modes which come into existence and um, go out of existence after a certain amount of time has elapsed. So he says in the same letter, measure, time, and number are nothing but modes of thinking, or rather of imagining, which allow us to arbitrarily limit the existence and duration of modes. We have to be careful here. When he talks about modes of thinking, read that as manner of thinking, whereas the second use of the word modes is obviously a reference to particular things. So time is a way of construing or imagining the duration of particular things. And it is a manner of imagining for Spinoza. Okay, he says in this scholium to a proposition in Book 2, no one doubts that we imagine time from the fact that we imagine bodies to be moved, some more slowly than others, some more quickly, some at equal speed. So we understand time by comparing rates of change, with using, say, as a benchmark, the motion of a dial on a clock. And he calls this imagination, which is a general term for the way we are affected by things, the way we associate ideas by how they affect us. Okay, what he calls the common order of nature rather than the intellectual order. So time for Spinoza appears to belong to the surface level of our experience. His view seems to be exactly the opposite of Hobbes, not Hobbes, Hume. Remember, Hume casts doubt on causality by saying all we know from direct experience are temporal regularities, and we jump from that to imputing causes and effects, causal explanations for these temporal regularities that we find in our experience. For Spinoza, on the other hand, the temporal regularity is just the manifest image. The real or the scientific image is the chain of cause and effect, which is largely hidden from us. So given that the chains of causes and effect, the intellectual order is largely beyond our ken, we use time or temporal regularity to make sense of our experience. So, so to sum up what we've said so far, duration pertains to the existence of particular things and eternity to the existence of substance, which is God or nature. But he also says that there are two conceptions of necessary existence, eternity, which are available to us. In the Scholium to Proposition 33, he says, a thing is called necessary either by reason of its essence or by reason of its cause. For a thing's existence follows necessarily either from its essence and definition or from a given efficient cause. If the thing is a substance, okay, its existence follows from its essence and definition. If the thing is a mode, okay, it's accounted for by the infinite chain of cause and effect, which is natura naturata. But in either case, it's necessary. Okay, there are just two ways of arriving at the necessity. So this is what he's referring to in Proposition 29, or the Scholium to Proposition 29 of Book 5. Things are conceived by us as actual in two ways, either as existing in relation to a given time and place, or contained in God and following from the necessity of the divine nature. Whatsoever we conceive in the second way is true or real, we conceive under the form of eternity. And their ideas involve the eternal and infinite essence of God. And he refers us to Proposition 44 in Book 2. That proposition states, it is not in the nature of reason to regard things as contingent, but as necessary. And the corollary, which is where he first introduces this phrase, under the form of eternity, the corollary says that it is in the nature of reason to perceive things under a certain form of eternity. And this statement is presented as a corollary to the proposition that it is not in the nature of reason to regard things as contingent, but as necessary. So under a form of eternity, it means to conceive things as necessarily existing. And he continues to drive this home in the following proposition, 45 in Book 2, where he says that every idea of every body or of every particular thing actually existing necessarily involves the eternal and infinite essence of God. And in the Scholium, he explains that by existence, he does not mean duration. He says, I am speaking, I repeat, of the very existence of particular things insofar as they are in God. For although each particular thing be conditioned by another particular thing to exist, in a given way, yet the force whereby each particular thing perseveres in existing follows from the eternal necessity of God's nature. Here what he's referring to here, as I understand it, is the distinction between causal determinism and necessitarianism. Causal determinism, he lays it out in Proposition 28 in Book 1, where he says that all particular things are brought into existence by an infinite chain of cause and effect. Okay, this is natura naturata, both in its physical aspect and in its mental aspect. It is entirely determined by causal determinism. Each particular thing is conditioned by another particular thing to exist in a given way. Yet the force whereby each particular thing perseveres in existing follows from the eternal necessity of God's nature. This is Spinoza's necessitarianism. Okay, there is, for Spinoza, a direct causal link between God and the existence of any particular thing. There are propositions in Book 1 which state that God is the immanent cause of every particular thing, or God is the efficient cause of every particular thing. And this makes sense if you understand that there is a single substance which can be viewed either as God or as nature. To say that nature is the efficient cause of any particular thing is hardly controversial. But the crucial distinction here, as I understand it, is the distinction between Spinoza's necessitarianism and his affirmation of causal determinism. So now we can look at the statements that Spinoza makes about the eternity of the mind in Book 5. In the Scholium to Proposition 31, he tells us that the mind is eternal insofar as it conceives things under the form of eternity. What things can the mind conceive? Well, the mind is the idea of the body. All the mind can conceive of are modifications of the body. Okay? The power of conceiving things under the form of eternity only belongs to the mind in virtue of the mind's conceiving the essence of the body under the form of eternity. So clearly he's not talking about any sort of immortality of the body, nor therefore immortality of the mind. In the demonstration, he says, our mind, insofar as it knows itself and the body under the form of eternity, has to that extent necessarily a knowledge of God and knows that it is in God and is conceived through God. Okay, so to say that the human body can be conceived under the form of eternity, in a sense, says nothing at all, because all bodies can be conceived under the form of eternity. All existence for Spinoza is necessary existence, but the human mind, being conscious of itself, has the power to understand its body and itself under the form of eternity, and that's his doctrine of the eternity of the mind. In Proposition 31, he says that the third kind of knowledge depends on the mind as its formal cause, insofar as the mind itself is eternal. So the eternity of the mind for Spinoza is the same as the third kind of knowledge, which is the same as the intellectual love of God.